So let's say that you're in a restaurant and you want to order some seafood. Now some friends of yours have said, you know, you might want to stay away from mussels because you might be allergic to them. And then you look at the menu. And on the menu, you see a plethora of items. And you don't really know what all of them are. So you have to decipher your way through this menu, right? Now, you know that mussels are shellfish. And you know that no fish with gills are shellfish. So does that mean that you can safely eat no fish with gills? Does that mean that you know whether or not that reasoning is valid? That reasoning works? Now, when dealing with categorical syllogisms, we need to think about the way in which all of the terms relate to one another. Now, each of the terms in our argument about shellfish, they relate to each other in a particular way, right? So, if you recall, all mussels are shellfish. No fish with gills are shellfish. And so you're betting that no fish with gills are mussels, right? You might be allergic to mussels, so you want to avoid eating mussels. So in this argument, we're looking for the major, the minor, and the middle term. Now, what the major term is usually the second term in the conclusion. So this would be the major term, and that means that this one right here, this is the minor term, and that would make these lovely S's right here the middle term. And the middle term is the most important term. The middle term is the most important term because it links the other terms here. See, if the middle term is out of sorts, then the whole thing explodes in a fiery blast of invalidity. As for this argument, well, this argument's valid, so you can go ahead and eat those mahi-mahi tacos. You'll thank me later. In order to make sure that we can put our validity testing kit to use, we need to make sure that our categorical syllogisms are arranged in the correct manner. So that means that we have to put them into something called standard form. Now, standard form requires 4 things. First, all 3 statements have to be categorical propositions, right? So all statements. Second, the middle term occurs twice, and both occurrences must be identical. You can't just change the letters halfway through, right? Third, not only does the middle term have to be identical, but it has to be used in the same sense. That is, you can't commit equivocation. You can't change the meaning of the middle term, just like you can't change the term halfway through your argument. No equivocation. And finally, for some odd reason, you definitely have to have a major and a minor premise. Furthermore, categorical syllogisms have 2 things, mood and figure. Now, mood refers to the order of the categorical propositions. So if we draw our handy little logic square, A, E, I, O, right? And then we go like that, there we go. So if we draw our handy little logic square like this, we can be reminded of the abbreviations for categorical propositions. Remember, it's all, no, some are not, right? Now, if we think back to our shellfish argument, we know that it's an all, no argument, which means that we represent the argument as A, E, E. This right here, this is the mood of the argument. Now, when it comes to figure, figure refers to the placement of the 2 middle terms in each argument, which means that when we can figure out what angle or what placement of the middle terms we have, we know something about how those type of arguments behave. Now, figure comes with really fancy, arcane words related to what each figure is, and they go by the names figure 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, the 4 figures correspond to the 4 placements of the middle terms. So I'm going to circle them here like this so you can kind of see the direction that these middle terms take. And then you can see that they kind of go like this. Well, this is a handy little device right here for remembering the figure of each, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, remembering that 2 and 3 are actually sort of weirdly arranged. So 2 seems like it would be on this side, but it's actually on this side of the argument. And then 3 seems like it would be on this side when really it's over here. But here we go. Right? There are your 4 figures. So if you know the mood of your argument, and if you remember, our argument was an AEE, right? And if you looked at the figure for that, you would realize that that figure has, say, it's figure 1 or 2. You would put something like 1 or 2 there, right? You can then take the further step of consulting a chart of unconditionally valid figures, an unconditionally valid mood figure. So let's say that you know the mood of the argument, right? In our case, it was an AEE. And then you know the figure of the argument. We're just going to assume that it's 1. That's not necessarily what it is. I forget what it is right now. But anyway, you could take the further step of then consulting a chart of unconditionally valid mood figure forms of argument, and you'd be able to know right away whether or not it's valid or invalid. All right? Well, let's see if we can use some technological magic to make it just appear for us. Like this. Ta-da! There we go. Techno magic. Actually, I took the time to write it out and just edit it, but whatever. So now if you recall, our argument was AEE, and I said it was figure 1. So we look here on the chart. Is there any indication that AEE would be found here? No, there is not, so it would be invalid. Now, if it was figure 2 or it was figure 4, well, that means that it would be unconditionally valid. Now, you could memorize this, but you also couldn't, right? If I were an evil instructor, I would tell you that you had to memorize this with the same amount of rigor as you memorize your roommate's Netflix password. But I'm not a cruel instructor, so you don't have to memorize this. Actually, there's a way easier way to do it than just having this chart here. All you gotta do is memorize 5 rules. Really, you gotta memorize 4 rules. The 5th one is like whatever, but 5 rules. And let's do this 5 rules YouTube list show style. So, list show style. Rule number 1. You've got to distribute your middle term. What? You thought you could get away with the fallacy of an undistributed middle? Doesn't work that way, pal. Everybody knows that distribution has to do with how much of a class is denoted by the term. And if the middle term, the connection term, the most important term, the term to rule all terms, is undistributed, well then you've got nothing to connect your terms, nothing to connect your premises. You've got nothing. You don't want nothing, so distribute your middle term. Rule number 2, if a term is distributed in the conclusion, you've got to make sure that it's distributed in a premise, lest you be charged with committing the fallacy of illicit major or illicit minor. Think about this example. All horses are animals, and some dogs are not horses. Therefore, some dogs are not animals. Clearly, this thing is super wrong. But why? Well, animals is distributed in the conclusion, but it's not distributed in the first premise, aka super wrong. Rule number 3, Two negative premises are not allowed on the premises. The fallacy is exclusive premises. Chew on this example, right? No fish are mammals, obviously. Some dogs are not fish, even more obvious. Therefore, some dogs are not mammals. That makes no sense, and not for the reason you think. It makes no sense because two statements are negative. And if the two premises are negative, they're exclusive. They don't connect to one another at all. Therefore, you can't have too many negative premises. You can't have too much negativity. Embrace some positivity. Chin up, logic dude. Rule number 4. A rule so obvious I feel bad for you that I have to state it. If you've got a negative premise, you need to have a negative conclusion. If you've got a negative conclusion, you need to have a negative premise, right? What's the fallacy for this? It's also so obvious I feel bad for you. It's called drawing an affirmative conclusion from a negative premise, or drawing an affirmative premise from a negative conclusion. Right, it's super obvious. Not too many negatives, but make sure that when you have negatives, they're the right kind of negatives. Otherwise, it's just bad form. Finally brings us to rule number 5. If you've got universal premises, you can't have a particular conclusion. Why? Because that's basically like baking a cake and then saying, well, I'm only going to have some of the icing. You've got a whole thing. Eat it. This fallacy is called the existential fallacy. Why? No one knows, but it's why we can't have nice things, right? Dig on this for an example. All mammals are animals, clearly, right? All tigers are mammals, also clear. Some tigers are animals. It's just stupid. Come on, everybody can see what you're up to. You're kind of tiptoeing around what you're trying to say. If you've got universal premises, you need to draw a universal conclusion. If you have particular premises, you need to draw a particular conclusion. You can't mix that stuff up. So there you have it. There are the rules. So don't mess things up with your categorical syllogisms, because you know the rules to make a valid argument. And if you know the rules, you got to follow the rules. Or you could consult the weird mood figure chart, but you know, that's just making more work for yourself. And who wants to do that?